Kaixo, arratsalde on denoi eta mila esker gurekin izateagatik. Koldo Mitxelena Kulturunearen izenean eta Gipuzkoa Kultura Departamentuan izenean ongi etorria eman nahi genizueke, etorri zareken guztioi. Gaur aurkeztera goaz Cómo contar la historia zikloaren azken saioa. Jardunaldi hauek lankidetza lan bat izan die, Memorial de Víctimas del Terrorismo eta Kultura Departamentuen artean. Kontakizun historikoa 3 ikuspuntu ezberdinetatik jorratu nahi izan dugu. Alde batetik ikerketa historiografikoa, Julian Casanova idazlearen eskutik, kazetaritza, memoria eta testigantza pertsonala, Mario Calabresi kazetari italiarrarekin, eta gaurko saioa fikzio literarioa Tatiana Țîbuleac-ek idazlearekin. Hemos querido abrir con estas jornadas, o el objetivo principal de estas jornadas ha sido abrir un espacio de reflexión cultural plural, riguroso y accesible para la ciudadanía, pensando que contar la historia, hoy más que nunca, es una responsabilidad social. Y para presentar y moderar este debate contamos con la escritora Luisa Echenique, que además ha sido la coordinadora del ciclo, junto con Gaizka Fernández Soldevilla y el equipo de Koldo Mitxelena Kulturunea. Bueno, Luisa es una colaboradora habitual de esta casa y además personalmente llevamos muchísimos años trabajando, así que presentar a Luisa casi es como presentar a alguien para mí de la familia. Pero bueno, sí que les diré que como escritora ha publicado las novelas Cuerdas, Llevar en la piel, Cruzar el agua, Aves del paraíso, Absoluta presencia, El detective de sonidos, El ángulo ciego, Los peces negros, El mal más grave y Efectos secundarios, las colecciones de relatos, Ejercicios de duelo, y La historia de amor de Margarita Maura y el poemario El arte de la pesca. También es autora de las obras teatrales La herencia, que obtuvo el premio Bueno Vallejo en el año 2016, y Guernica es ahora. Ha traducido numerosas obras del francés, desde hace también varios años dirige un taller de escritura creativa. Es también directora del espacio Canal Europa, que es un espacio promovido también por la Diputación Foral de Guipúzcoa y su Departamento de Cultura, y del festival literario Un Mundo de Escritoras, también colaboradora de distintos medios de prensa escrita y radio, entre otros la cadena SER de Euskadi. En 2007 recibió del gobierno francés la distinción de Caballero de la Orden de las Artes y de las Letras. En 2013 el Ayuntamiento de San Sebastián le otorgó también la Medalla al Mérito Ciudadano y precisamente hace muy pocas semanas ha recibido el premio de la Fundación Mariona India. Por mi parte, pues muy poco más, que disfruten de la charla y recordarles, eso sí, para la traducción simultánea, los canales, el canal 1 es el castellano, el canal 2 euskera y el canal 3 inglés. Así que nada, buenas tardes y Luisa, cuando tú quieras.
Good evening, Tatiana, and welcome to San Sebastián. It's a real pleasure to have you with us today. I'm going to make a very brief presentation of yours in Spanish, and then we'll start our conversation in English. Bueno, buenas tardes a todas, a todos. Gracias por estar aquí a esta charla con Tatiana Țîbuleac, que cierra el ciclo, como ha explicado Pachi Presa, de cómo contar la historia desde precisamente la literatura. Muy brevemente decirles que Tatiana Țîbuleac es una escritora moldava, aunque en la actualidad vive y trabaja en París, que ha sido periodista, pero que desde hace ya varios años se dedica por completo a la literatura y que es autora de novelas que sé que muchos de ustedes conocen, que han recibido una extraordinaria acogida de público y de crítica, como El verano que mi madre tuvo los ojos verdes, que galardonada con muchos premios, entre ellos el premio Cálamo entre nosotros, y también El jardín de vidrio, que ha obtenido el premio de literatura de la Unión Europea. Sé que muy pronto en la misma editorial Impedimenta se va a publicar una nueva novela suya que lleva un título que ya invita a leerse: Cuando seas feliz, golpea primero. Lo dejo ahí, pero creo que puede ser muy interesante. Tatiana, the central topic of this series of discussion is how to tell history, how to tell historical events. So my first question will be, how do you see this relationship between history and literature? what literature can add to our knowledge or understanding of historical situations or events?
First of all, good evening. I'm very glad to be back in my lovely San Sebastian, because it's one of my favorite places. Very glad to be here with Luisa, who always have wonderful events, full events, profound events, and even more so in this place, which does very necessary, wonderful work. It's a topic which interests me deeply, not only as a writer, but also as a reader, because I'm first of all reader. So I hope to have, an exchange today about this, and to go back home with some information for myself as well. Just to go back to your question, how do we talk about past in our literature? I would say, first of all, that we should talk about past with honesty. There is no correct way to write literature, as we all know, because a story which can be good for someone can be bad for another person. Everyone is reading through their own glasses a book. Every time you write about a past event, you should be ready to have a confrontation, because someone else who grew up in the same yard with you, sat on the same bench with you, will say that this didn't happen like that. I saw it as well, and this is what happened. I think it's easier to be a historian because you have all the instruments to write correct, factological, to convey the picture, because you can't lie that this didn't happen. While then you are a writer. You have a very difficult job to do. You have to tell your story. You have to tell it with your words, but in the same time you have to be honest about what happened, and you have to be correct with your readers. I'm coming from a part of the world where history was not part of a literature for many, many years. In Eastern Europe, we have a problem with our collective remembering. We didn't talk about history unless it was a textbook in school or an approved book, and most of our history was falsified. If you would ask me now about history I learned until I was 15 or 16 years old in a Soviet school in Moldova, in Chisinau, I would tell you that I had to redo all my lessons when I grew up, because not only most of the things we learned were untrue or talked in a very erroneous way or lied to us, but also the global events were also told through this very Sovietic prism, and they grew up thinking that, everything was won by Russians, everything was, only the Russians were heroes, everyone else was an enemy. So for us, learning our history, the real history, started only about 30 years ago, when independence came and we were allowed to read also foreign literature. I would say that in that part of the world, and I'm talking about Eastern Europe deeply, writers were not really interested in talking about past, about crimes of the past, about crimes of a regime, in the same way like Western Europe was. If I would compare how many books were written about deportations, about famine in Ukraine, about Holodomor, right? About thousands of people sent to Gulag, to Siberia, you would count them, I don't know, a couple of them, and in the same way, very secluded. They were, of course, not allowed to be read. And only now, when people can write about the past, and they can do it freely, and there is no, let's say, the censorship like it was before, I discovered with a lot of wonder why writers don't want to still write about them, because they are not interesting for them, the topic, because they know that public is not really willing to read that, because they are interested in other things, because young generation doesn't care, because they didn't even know about them. They didn't know about them from family, they didn't know about them from school. So we have a couple of generations who grew up without any interest in their past, in their history, in their stories which happened in their families. I'm talking about this so freely because I am one of the guilty ones. When I became a writer, I had in my family this huge story. You know, my grandparents were deported to Gulag. My mother is born in Gulag. She was born there even if my grandparents were sent there to die. But you see, a miracle happened and she was born and she survived and they all came back because Stalin died. And I heard this story, at least when I was young woman already, like from 20 years old. I knew all the details, you know. I have lots of textbooks at home written by my mother by hand. Things, when it happened, how it happened, who was the neighbor who, you know, told the communists about the grains at home. I know these things. And I never wrote about that. Why didn't I write about it? Because when I became a journalist, I thought that my interest is somewhere else. When I became a writer and I fled from Moldova and I moved to France, I thought that why do I need to write about Moldova? Why can't I write about the world? Why can't I be, you know, cosmopolitan? Why can't I be rebel, interesting? Why can't I be bring something else on the table? So when I wrote my first novel and it was successful, I understood this is correct. You know, this is the recipe that you have to be from somewhere, but not necessarily from your own country. People don't want to know that I'm Moldovan, they just want to read stories. But then I wrote the Jardin de Vidrio. It's like I wrote this book, but this book awoken me. This book, in parallel of me writing it, asked me, like, who are you? What are you telling your children? What is your roots? What are you going to do further? What is your legacy? What is your voice as a writer? All these questions were there when I was writing it, because I understood that a person cannot continue living all his life without including in his heritage grandparents, parents. You know, my children don't even want to speak my language anymore because they are born in another country. It's a bit difficult for them. My mother doesn't come enough to motivate them. They don't want to answer in Romanian that I'm talking, so they know that I speak other languages. I don't know if it's painful, but I think it's wrong. And it's my guilt somewhere. How do I tell them about who I am if they don't even speak my language? It's a long answer to your story,
it's a
but I just
one.
wanted to make this introduction to tell you that even those who have to talk about past and have information and have abilities, they don't always choose so, because it's much easier to be interested doing other things.
Yeah. Talking about languages, your jardin is in Romanian?
Gradina.
Gradina. The glass garden is set in a very specific time and space context. So your characters, and particularly your protagonist, Latosia, evolves in the transition from the Soviet rule, a period of Soviet rule, to the after the dissolution of the Soviet Union. And what I think particularly interesting is that all the tensions and the difficulties of that time are exposed or revealed in your novel through a linguistic struggle, because your character, Latosia, is torn between Russian, Romanian, and Moldovan. So could you talk about this linguistic struggle that becomes a sort of metaphor of all the difficulties of that time?
When I started writing that book, I didn't think about this metaphor, which somehow built up in time, the metaphor being this life of this little girl and life of a country. Because basically what we have, it's a story which can be read both ways. It's a story of an orphan girl who is Romanian ethnic, but being adopted by a Russian woman from orphanage. And she's growing up in Chisinau, which is under Soviet occupation. It's like those years, it's part of Soviet Union, it's part of those 15 republic sisters, as we called them. And those are the years when locals, Moldovan, like Romanian ethnic population, is being separated from Romania by being created a false identity. We were called Moldovans, and we were forced to speak Moldovan language, which doesn't exist, by the way. Never tell a Moldovan that he speaks a Moldovan language. And also, in order to do that, the communists did a very easy thing, a very ingenious thing. They just changed the alphabet. And they told the people, from now on, you don't write with your Latin alphabet, because Latin is for Romanians from Romania, Latin alphabet is for Italians, Latin alphabet is for Spanish. You are not any of those. You have nothing to do with that. You are not Romanians, you are not Russians either, but we will give you our alphabet to write your language with. So for many years, this is what happened. We had a new language called Moldovan, which we had to write in Russian alphabet with Romanian words. You can imagine the frustration, but also what does this do to a person when you have no language? When you understand the words, but you can't really write the letters. The older generation who had school in Romania at the time, they really didn't speak Russian, so they lost the ability to be proficient, in a language. The young generation, of course, they grew up with the idea of Russian being the only good and correct and the most beautiful language. So this is her struggle. It's an interesting thing that we talk about this in Spain, because I had very interesting talks about this particular thing here because of Catalan, because of Basque, and many times I was asked a very curious question: why did you not want to keep your language, like Moldovan? Being unique, being your own is better, isn't it? Because for us this means independence, this means identity. And I had to explain that for us, identity was not to be small, but to be big, to be part of bigger, because our language is Romanian. And for us, independence was not in this smallness, but in this bigness. And then I was writing Gradina. I was convinced that it will be read by 20 people, like my family, my friends, and that's it, because it's a story which cannot go cannot cross the borders. But since then, the book was translated, I don't know, in nearly many languages. And I see how this story is fitting so many regions, so many communities, so many people who have the same struggle, just maybe in a different form. Just to say that this book is a book of becoming of Moldova. Because even if I didn't want to write a historical book, the life of this little girl being on the prim plan somehow managed to talk about history on the second plan. And it made it maybe without any ambitions, but maybe that's why it touched so many people, because I didn't want to be a historian, but the girl was, the character was. So this is one way of talking about history. When you don't want to, you just talk about someone's life, and then the history will appear, because it's like a big canvas, and our lives are just embroidered in history. History sometimes is the main character in many books without the author meaning that.
Yeah, and in a very paradoxical way, we have very often the impression of reaching the core or the truth of historical events better through fiction than through a historical essay or treatise, for example. How do you explain this extraordinary capacity of literature to seduce, to persuade?
Because literature is working with the literature's instrument is feeling. So when you create a story, when you create, I don't know, a character which a person starts believing in or loving it or remembering their own life, their own dramas, their own tragedies, they become attached to the person. You know, sometimes you read the book and you don't remember the story, you don't even remember the places, you remember one character from the book, and with that character you have a relationship. That's why it's so easy to transform literature in propaganda, because in the way you can write, honest, let's say, literature, in the same way you can write twisted and falsified literature, and to disseminate messages for war, for hate, because it's the same thing. You can create a nice character, but who will not have very nice ideas. And unfortunately, I'm talking about this also in this context of a Ukrainian war. Lots of culture people became part of this war machinery, because every tyrant, every regime will first of all reach to the people who knows how to touch the other people, how to make them believe, how to, if you take a politician and put him on the stage, people will know that this is his job to do it. This is his job to lie to us. But if you take an author or a singer or a painter or a sculptor and ask him to make a nice sculpture, or ask him to write a nice text or a poem, that would be much more subtle way to do it. And we can see this everywhere. Soviet Union was a huge example on that. Only the authors who wrote correct things for the regime were published and promoted, and the books were cheap. The authors had such a power in the state. They were like really important people in the state. So by creating this monument for authors, by making sure that they love you and they disseminate your messages, this is how you make people think that even in a book, the reality is what we live. It must be correct. A poem cannot lie, in a way. Yes, if I'm talking too much.
No, it's wonderful. So for my next question, I would like to read a very small passage of the Glass Garden. And your narrator, Latoshka, is describing, talking about another character, Za Antonovich, who is a sort of constant storyteller.
Storyteller, yes.
And she says, for them, for those always beautiful and often crazy people, life should be a story, because only there, between their soft and magical ribs, do they make peace with evil and pain, with diseases and betrayals, because they know it. They know that a story never leaves things unresolved. A story, even the shortest, even the saddest, always takes good care to do justice. I think it's a very beautiful passage, I would say a wonderful resume, summary of how literature can tell history, but I would like to ask you particularly about the last sentence, about the relationship between stories and justice.
For me personally, my writing is a way to make justice. I will not change things, but I can make things right in writing. Mm-hmm. So then I revisit things or people or, let's say, situations. And I know that this is my playground, writing. And this is my way of saying the words I didn't say in time, or just talking about things which never were said, or giving voice to people who never had a voice. For me, this is literature. But literature doesn't have to be the same for everyone. Mm-hmm. I think that in the moment when we will start making rules for literature, for art in general, we'll kill it. Because even a good book, how do we know that a good book is a good book? Only because we read some bad books before. Because only this wildness and no limit and no rules in writing can create those wonderfully universal or very personal, stories. I always said that literature should not be good or bad, and writers should be having freedom to write whatever they choose. After all, it's the reader who will decide if a book talks to them or not. In the same time, I feel very lucky that I became a writer in times where I had complete freedom to write, and I didn't have to, take out things or reformulate or necessarily say something very nice about a politician or a president or about the party, because this is how literature was for many, many years. We have this debate now in our country, but some of our most loved writers had to write also poems or stories where they spoke well about Communist Party. What do we do with these writers? Because now it's very easy to cancel a writer, to cancel books. What do we do with it? Do we say that everything he wrote is bad just because he had one poem? Or do we put it in a context? Would be our literature and our identity better or more vibrant if they wouldn't have written anything? My answer is that you have to explain the history to young people, but to everyone. You have to explain that this book or this text was written in times where you couldn't publish anything if you wouldn't have written those 3 verses. Maybe it's not as good as now. Maybe it's not as good as in other countries in that time. But you need to understand that without this, we wouldn't have had literature at all. So I am strongly for explaining the past and not only judging, because if we would have to erase
yeah.
to erase everything which was wrong, I'm afraid that lots of literature will be very, very poor, because nothing would be left, because there's no thing such like an immaculate book, at least for last, 50 years in Eastern Europe. Very little people were able to write only what they wanted, and they were probably dissidents, not probably, but definitely dissidents, or people who had to leave homes in order to write. Sometimes when I'm speaking to young people who want to become writers and they ask for advices, I'm saying, like, the main thing what you have is that you can write what you want being at home. You don't have to leave home. You don't have to hide in order to write. That is an amazing, reality, which not lots of us had in past.
Yeah, and in relation to this, unfortunately, to explain history and to write about history means also to write about, very often, to write about violence. Your books also deal with violence. Could you tell us how do you approach from a aesthetic and also ethical perspective this violence to create, I don't know, characters, situations, language that is violent?
I rarely create characters from scratch. Because I worked as a journalist for many years, I have quite a lot of examples of different situations, people, places I visited. I've wrote about them as a journalist, of course, which requires a different approach, because as a writer you have to be, I mean, you have a freedom to write differently when you are a journalist. So I would say that all my stories start with real people, not necessarily with real stories, but definitely with real people, because this is how I start writing in my head. When I see someone, I like him so much or her so much, and then it's just like you cut this person from its own reality, and then you just create another life for it in the book. Sometimes my characters lived different lives in real life, but I just didn't want to make them those people in my book. So, I think that was part of a game as well. When you take a teacher, but you make a cosmonaut or something else in your books. I have a very friendly relationship with reality. I believe that if you write, you shouldn't stop at the middle of a sentence. If you started writing about violence, you should explore that topic, even if you, as an author, will be maybe ashamed to talk in front of an audience. If you write about abuse, you should try to use up that space with a real voice of a victim, instead of just touching it for being able to say, oh, I address violence in my books, or I address abuse, or I address drugs in my books. I believe that there is no need to be shy when you write about a problem, because we do this in real life. In Moldova, for many years, we didn't speak about home violence, about abuse for children, about abuse from work. We didn't speak about these things because it was considered a norm. You could beat your child and no one can do anything to you, because as a parent, it was the case that you thought that it's your right. Of course, today is not like that, but this used to be like that. So if not through literature, when are you going to talk about it? I'm telling my children many times that the life you lead today, it's not completely different, but quite different from what we had to do in our childhood. We had more liberties, it's true, because we were more free to go everywhere. Parents were more busy, less NGOs existed, children's rights were not so many people were caring about children's welfare. It was the family institution who dealt with children. And they don't believe sometimes that I'm telling, we had this and this and this, but no one said it's bad. But in the same time, they learn this from the book, and then if they want to know more, they can search, they can put their life in a context. There are lots of things I've learned about the world from literature. Imagine a girl in Moldova who are reading only Russian books, because every translation had to be in Russian. But even then, you could learn about, read a story from America, or read a story from France, or read a story from Poland, countries you would never visit, because at that time we never thought we will be able to travel to all those places. So this was our traveling, you know, this was our ticket to see different food, different places, different ways of living. Reading, I think, was an escape for many, many people.
Yeah, I agree with you, but when you say that not to be shy when you write about violence, do you have any, how to say, any interdiction or restraint from an ethical point of view when you write about violence?
When I did write the first book, I didn't think about that so much, because it was a story which was quite simple plot, you know, so it was the relationship. When I wrote Gradina, I was a bit more careful because of this linguistic war as well. I didn't want this book to be at the base of violences, or I didn't want people to hate it or to start a sort of discussion that you did this, we did that. I was hoping that this book will be a sort of, you know, reconciliation for people, just to read it and say, yes, we lived that, this meant to us this. Now, with my last novel, which you mentioned at the beginning, I must admit that I was more careful, because I think that many times writers don't think about people's sensitivities, about how much a bad character or a character which is being, you know, too free with something, or with ideas, or with racist remarks, or with misogynistic jokes, can actually hurt some people. So I thought that for me it was important that this book is telling a story, but a story that doesn't traumatize some groups of people. So I asked some of my friends who are much more sensitive than me to read it from this point of view. Maybe you can call it sensitive reading. Yeah. But in the same time, I don't believe that everything should be written only from this point of view, because then you just write instruction book. You know, do this, do that. I think literature should have emotions. So it depends on the author, how much he wants to risk, how much he's prepared to, you know, to get criticized after that. My third novel, I think it's even more violent than my other books, but this violence doesn't come invented, because it talks about those years after independence in Moldova, when it was horrible times, when we had very high crime rate, where the first emigration wave started, where lots of people left Moldova selling their internal organs to traffickants, a lot of traffic with young girls who became prostitutes abroad. It's the first migrants who came illegally into Europe and had very bad lives for many years until they paid the debts. So how can I speak about these things only mentioning it en passant? My main character, her name is Mila. She is a woman who had a horrible life, but she still finds pleasure in life and finds the good in life. But she has a deeply distressing voice. She has a very strong voice. But I thought I owe this to her and to those women who lived her life, and that not one, not 10, thousands of them. And I thought that if I say that I'm writing about migration or about prostitution, and then I start with a sort of very, you know, sweet, sort of a la Hollywood, you know, love something story, that would be for nothing if you're not prepared to go deep into a topic. Better leave it for
Yeah.
someone else. This is what I feel. So I am ready for some criticism, but I knew that I didn't want my voice to sound false. That is, for me, more scary than cancellation of other things.
Yeah, though there is violence in your book, but there is also beauty.
I hope so.
Yeah. So I think your books are a wonderful combination of the violent and the hopeful, the beautiful and the harsh. How do you deal with this combination of both? I mean, in a sense, extremes of things.
Because people are like that. I rarely meet only good people or only bad people. You know, our generation, my generation, we lived at the crossroad of everything. Everything we knew was changing from a day to another, right? We were brought up in one country, we were young people in another, we started with a language, we finished with another. In school, all kind of experiments were done on us. Everything changed very fast. From very rich people, we became very poor because money were taken from us. Our parents who had jobs and a future and dignity, overnight they become no one, they become beggars, and other people are the elite of a country, you know. So I think that for me, seeing this changeability in a person, it's easy because this is how we are. I've seen really lovely people who became, how shall I say, very bad people because the life forced them to do. And I saw infractors and people who went to jail and they came out, but building up good lives, or somehow lives where they became generous and kind towards the others. I saw people who said that they are patriots and they will fight for everything and they believe, but they didn't do anything when the time came, and they were the first to run and the first to betray. On the other hand, like shy, very simple people who became cultural leaders and leaders of our, I don't know how to say it in English, Renaissance in Moldova, who fought in a way that we would never believe that. So I don't believe in black or white. I think we all can become heroes and traitors overnight. It's also life which brings from us this dark and white. And especially in literature, I think for me it's much more interesting to have a person which evolves in a book than to start like from the first page. This is Ada, she is good. This is Mihai, he is bad. And then, because in life it's not like that. We cannot, if we are lucky, we can become who we want, but sometimes not.
Well, I want to approach now a different topic because, well, we already know that history has been mainly written by the victors and by men, but we are increasingly hearing stories or historical accounts that come from the margins, from new voices, other voices, and essentially from women's voices. Women are very important in your novel. So how do you approach the gender perspective when writing about history?
I don't create a story thinking about the quota of male and female characters. As you could see in my first book, it was like basically two characters. In my second, and I was a man in the book, so the narrative voice was of a man, which I didn't do on purpose, but at the moment when I discovered it, I felt very comfortable to tell that story with a man voice. I don't know if I will do it again, probably not. because the second book was full with women. And I was many times asked, where are the men in the Jardin de Vidro? You don't have men. And I said, okay, well, missing men is a character. I do have some men there. But I think that in my second novel, having so many women, it came naturally because I grew up in a society where women were very present and they did everything. So men, of course, we had men, but they were more, how shall I say, busy, all the time busy. So a woman would be a mother, a wife, a mother would be, would have a job, a mother would be a social, liant for everything. That's why women were, the main focus were on women. But also because I understand women. I think that women are like this kind of big, matryoshkas, which you can just, if you have time, you'll find so much wisdom in the voice of a woman who lived a lot. And I'm very fond of my grandmother, and I just feel that every time I'm writing about past, these words come to me with her voice somehow, because this woman lived so many lives in one. She lived so many things in her life, but she was always very modest and quiet and never complaining. And I think this is true for many of your grandmothers here, because that generation understood being strong differently. For them, being strong was never to talk about problems. But I believe that we don't have to do everything which our grandmothers and mothers did. I believe in voicing the problems. That's why many times in my literature I say, maybe you wouldn't have talked about that, but I want to talk, because this is the way now. What is not said, it didn't exist. And we did this mistake for many, many years. And I think that now it is time to tell. I'm not saying only women have to write books, because that is also silly. But I feel that women have a lot to say, and they should do it, because there are beautiful voices, wonderful voices, which can bring things which were buried for years, and they have to speak now.
Yeah. In relation to this, I think from my point of view that a good way to tell history is to add voices, to bring together and to contrast different voices and points of view. And one feature that I personally appreciate very much in your book, the Glass Garden, is what I would call the choral perspective, because there is a main character, Latosha, the narrator, but there are also we hear also the voices of others, all the neighbors that share this the same courtyard or island, as she says. So could you tell us about this collective, in a sense, collective voice that seems so suitable when writing history, or for writing history?
I don't know if it's suitable to write all history, but definitely to write the story of Jardin de Vidro. It was very good match, because you should imagine that our life back then was very collective.
Yeah.
You know, the only way to exist was to exist in a sort of collective. This is how it was called, because you didn't have so much ways of expressing your identity and individuality, because everything was the same. We had a block of flats where everything was the same, you know, the layout of our houses were the same. We only could buy 2 or 3 models of furniture. We all could wear 2 or 3 models of dresses. Men had 3 types of suit, we had 3 types of dresses. So imagine, spring comes, you just go out here and you see that everyone is nearly dressed differently. You even think, where are all these things coming? But then it would be a different picture. You would go out and you would see every second woman wearing the same dress. And if she didn't wear it today, for sure she had it at home for next day. Then at school, you always had to be not better, not worse, but not better, definitely, than other kids. Because being a good student meant to be the same as the others. Average. Everything which was coming out of a standard was punished, because it means that you are different, individual, that wrong words, both. Then again, your aspirations. What can your aspirations be? Then everything around is the same. You can only want holidays in the same places where you've been already, or your neighbors have been and told you. Saying that, oh, I want to go to Paris or I want to go to New York, that would be a big mistake, because this means that you're not happy with what you have. So this collective thing was a way of living, a way of thinking. You read things which are already done for you. You go to events which are already approved for you. That is why we are missing a lot of voices from that time, because no one had a different voice. A person would speak, an approved person would speak, and everyone would have a feeling that they already spoke in their mind, which was rubbish. Of course, nothing of the sort happened. So everyone who was against was sent off or was shot somehow, or was... So in that particular case, of course, that collective living was a very typical what we had. But I do believe in multiple voices telling one story, because as I said before, what was good for one family was bad for the second one, and only now we can explore that badness. Only now we can make that person tell, you know, in that day that you said it was the best day of your life, I actually had a tragedy, because... So, as I said at the beginning, I don't know if it's a correct way of writing about history, whether you invent characters, whether you invent your own story, whether you hide in your invented story, but it should be written. The history has to be written by more people, and then those dots will be connected in something which is true and valuable, and something which can be, you know, transmitted to the kids. I'll just say one thing. Now, when I launched my last novel in Chișinău, I was talking to some children from high school, and they said, like, no, that cannot be. It's not possible that this happened in Chișinău. And I said, of course it happened. It happened 30 years ago with your parents. It can't not be, because your parents are my age now. And they said, no, we would know. How is it possible that we do not make these children know what happened 30 years ago, not even 60? Because parents protect children. So when you are living in a war, you know, like in this film, when what is it, like La Vita è Bella, then you pretend it's not a war, you pretend it's not bad, you pretend it doesn't hurt. And then you grow up thinking that indeed that wasn't so bad, since my parents were still okay. But it wasn't okay. It was bad. It's just that we were protected. And maybe one of our parents' generation and grandparents' generation, maybe this is their hope. But when we will grow up and become parents ourselves, we will understand how bad it was, and they hope that we will talk, that we will tell their stories.
Well, I think talking about collective voices and polyphony, maybe it's time to open our conversation to the audience, to the questions they might want to ask. Os van a pasar un micrófono de de mano para hacer las preguntas, por favor. Sí os pediría como un controlador aéreo que repartamos el espacio aéreo para que pueda hablar el mayor número de personas si lo desea. Así que, por favor, las preguntas que queráis, pero sí puede ser de una forma breve. ¿Hay alguna pregunta ya? Aquí tenemos una. Okay, you need channel 3, okay?
Yes.
Lo va a decir en inglés.
Sí, sí, no,
Vale.
she's going to ask you to ask a question in English.
Okay, so first of all, thank you so much for the talk and for your writing. And as a linguistics student, I wanted to circle back to one of the very first questions about language, because I was curious, not on a political or historical level, your relationship as a writer towards language. Because, for example, when I was reading the summer, like your novel, one of the things that struck me the most was the relationship of Alexei towards his origins, which was not positive, but sometimes it was those moments of connection he had with his mom, with language, with them talking their own language. I don't know if Polish or if any other connecting language that they had. And yeah, so my question was how you as a writer and as a person with a language that maybe you don't speak daily, maybe not with your family or with your friends, with your colleagues, how do you relate to that, and how do you make your characters relate to that?
Thank you for your question. I think when someone says language, people have very different ways of looking at this word. My father, for instance, for him, language meant identity. This is something which he knew that he will die for, or he was ready to die for, because this ability to speak Romanian, when that was forbidden, and to read books which were forbidden, and to continue expressing himself in a Romanian in that time was probably more important than having a family. So this was a generation of my father, which they believed in happiness only then you know who you are, you know who you fight for, and that was really important for him. I grew up with two languages. I grew up with Russian and Romanian, and I didn't had that problem like them, hating this language, because I was too small, and I was saying just before that my parents didn't really talk about politics at home. No one talked about politics at home, because that meant that you could be arrested or your child could be, you could have trouble. So when I grew up and I understood enough what is this Russian, why we were, forced to speak Russian and abandon our language, I knew that I can't like Russian, because all the truth came to me and I saw it with my eyes, and as a journalist I already understood things. The problem was that lots of my memories from my childhood were in Russian now. So I had favorite films, I had favorite stories, we had favorite games with children. So then, like my character from the book, the question was, what do you do with all that? Do you cut it completely? Do you abandon everything? It's a big part of your childhood, of your memory, of your culture, of your identity. It's a dirty part, apparently, because it shouldn't be there, but it's still in you. So what do you do with that? How much you carry with you in life? This is the drama of Lastochka in this book as well. What does she do with this, whole world which was created in our language? now, when the war in Ukraine started, this drama became even bigger, because not only the childhood, but also a lot of, cultural world came through this language to us. Films, concerts, friendships, relationships, friends. It's something which you, learning a language and everything a language can tell you, it's not easy to forget, because it becomes part of your memory, of your identity. My children speak many languages now in school, but they don't have what I had. They were not forced to learn those languages. They were choosing to learn Spanish, German, Latin. They didn't have to choose this above their own language. So I think Lastochka says at one point in the book, a language can be learned through love as well, not only through fear, because many people in the world still learn a language through fear, and that is the fundamental difference. In this book, I made it in such a way that some of the memories come directly in Russians. You could see lots of sentences coming in Russian, because this is how I remember, when you have a day and then you remember it from different sources. It's like one colored source, one uncolored source, and I understand that sometimes lots of memories are coming directly in that language. And I wanted to show in this book that there are people, not me anymore, but there are people who function like that. They cannot just be only one person. They are the person which was created from many, many sources. And now imagine the migrants, imagine people who leave everything behind and move to another country, where they have to start speaking that language above everything else. That is another identity, because 90% of their time they speak in a language which is not even there. So then they have to say very fast who are they and what is their house and what is their... it's not automatically. Sometimes I envy people who are born and live and die in the same place, because things are very clear. They see the same things. They see the same things their parents saw, their grandparents saw. It's a wonderful feeling in knowing everything about the place, and that place knows everything about you. It's like you are surrounded by things you know and understand, and tastes which you knew speak to everyone around you. But for many of us, this is a luxury, because this fast life, this very, not so many borders, and it just means that you have to change every day. And sometimes you think twice when you say, where are you from? Are you asking me if I'm from Moldova, or where I'm from this morning, or where I'm from when I'm writing my books? I don't know if I answered your question, but I tried.
Yes, Tatiana, but related to this question, I think it's also interesting that you're a writer. And for a writer, I would say the main relationship is with literary language too. So your writing, your style is very rich, very powerful, made of powerful metaphors, images, similes. So how is this relationship with literary language and your formal options?
Maybe it is coming from the same place, because I never... sometimes I'm writing in Romanian things which never have been written like that. And probably my Romanian colleagues would say, like, you can't say this in Romanian, it's not really correct. And I say, yeah, I know, but I still do it like that, because I was not brought up only in Romanian, and because I do have other influences. So for me, I'm not afraid of languages, For me, they all have words, and these words are just there to help you to tell a story, to convey a story. You see, even if if people speak in Basque or Chinese or English, there are words there which somehow help us to communicate. So for me, in my books, I don't think about how to structure what I write. I don't think whether it's prose or it's poetry. I don't think whether a chapter is written short or longer. I don't structure my books. It's just that I want to convey an image or an idea or a feeling, and then I use what I have. Sometimes in my first book I wrote very shortly, but sentences are very short, full with, sometimes hate, sometimes love, sometimes laughter, and sometimes cry. But in the second book, I took my time. It's just like I sat on a bench and, I was eating this sunflower seeds like we do in Eastern Europe. And I was just talking. In my third novel, my voice is completely different. It's just that when I tell a story, I tell it in the way I find it more useful for the person. Not useful, but easier to tell it, to approach it. I do believe in style, yes, but I was asked many times how to build a style. I don't know, because I only have one style. I think that a style for an author is that moment when he feels that every word he says falls in its place, because he has only one mind and the same words. So that for me is a style. When it's perfect, when for you it makes sense, everything you say. Sometimes I stop writing because I can see that is a good sentence, but it's not mine. It doesn't have my voice.
Yeah.
That's why when I'm writing, I'm not reading, because there are books which I read and I love, and I say, oh. And then you start stealing. You think like, I can write that better, maybe, but that's not you. It works with someone else. The story is fantastic, then you tell it, but not me, because we have different voices. So that is my relationship with language.
Thank you. ¿Alguna pregunta? Sí, tenemos una pregunta ahí atrás.
Oh, hello, thank you for your talk today. It's very interesting. My question is about how do you find the inspiration for your stories? Do you choose them? Do they come to you somehow and you work on them? The characters, do you choose the characters, or do you feel like they're talking to you before you start writing about them? What is your relationship with the story and with the characters in every book you write?
I think it's the story which comes first. As I said at the beginning, I like people, so if I like a person, I like the way it is, I will just steal it from my book, but I don't know yet for what book. So probably it's like a database, of interesting people, and then when you start writing a story, you just understand that would be fitting, or this character would bring something more on the table if you put it. I don't always know how my books will finish or how they will evolve. Sometimes I feel that, wow, I've created this really great character, because I wrote a page or two and you like it. As a writer, then that writing will remain in the book or in people's head. But then you see that you don't have anything else from him. You can see that you squeeze this character, but it still doesn't give you more than those two very good pages. And then you understand that he will or she will not be able to hold the book, and you have to create another voice. And then you make that character just appearing and disappearing, because you understand that you need to start from the beginning. Who is telling this story? And that is quite difficult, because sometimes I never start my books from the beginning. It's usually very chaotic, like I could write the last page or something in the middle. I always start from something, from a detail. I think in the first book I even started from those images from the sea, you know. But still, that doesn't mean that you have a voice which is telling the story. And that is the struggle for me always, to make the main character. Because I always have characters in my mind, but not always. For instance, in Verano, this is what happened, is then I made this male voice the book started to hold. Because at the beginning it wasn't like that. It was a chapter talked on, and I know, a woman could have written it about, you know. So I think it's a cliche to say that the characters will find the book, but it's true in a way. You will always have to, you know, to change the way you see the voices in your head, because some of them are shouting louder, but they are not the ones which will keep the narration.
¿Alguna pregunta más? Maybe we should take advantage of your presence
Of the
today
silence.
here. We're waiting your new novel to be published in Spanish. Cuando seas feliz, golpea primero. When you are happy, strike first. Could you tell us a little bit of this novel and the new one you are writing, which is particularly difficult for you?
Well, this novel I started a long time ago, the one I published, I mean. And unfortunately, from that book I started like 5 years ago, nothing is nearly rested, because I understood very clearly that I have too many, by the way, the question, too many characters, too many. I wanted to say too much in one book, and that never works, never. It's just because I didn't write for a long time, and all that things which, like everything which I accumulated, I just wanted to put in one book, and that never works. Because I started to write a book about my father, and about his generation, and about the way they lived, the way they rised and, you know, died. But then I understood that that cannot be only a book about him, because my voice today of a woman of 50 years old living in another country was coming too often and wanted to speak for herself as well. So then I understood it's a book about two people, it's not about only one person. It's a bizarre title. Of course, everyone is asking me, what does this mean? Is this a sort of violent, you know, call, like, be happy and strike everyone? No, it's not. It's a bit coming from this Eastern European mentality, which is always like, then you are happy, don't be too happy. Don't think too much about this happiness, because something bad is already waiting at the corner. So, like, protect your happiness, like keep it low, don't linger in it, or even better, strike first, because someone will strike you. So, because now it's like few months, not few months, so it was published in September, I have so many interpretations of this title, and they're wonderful, that I was thinking whether to come with this explanation or not, or just leave people to do their own reading, because I received so many messages also through a Bible prism, you know, and it's wonderful that people see it how they see it. It's like, this is the magical power of literature, that when you write it, you don't have to worry about it, because people will read it for themselves. So I really hope that it's indeed going to be published next year. I know that my wonderful Basque interpreter Marian Ochede-Ribe is already working on it, which is great joy and big honor. And Enrique Redel is the publisher, already announced it, which means that it will be probably the first language which will be translated, which can't be better than this. For me, Spanish readers are very special. So yes, I hope it will arrive to Spain and you will be able to read it, and even more, I hope that you will like it at least a bit.
And hopefully invite you for the presentation in San Sebastián
Yes,
again.
you know.
From a point of view, I have to say that the title sounds perfect to
Okay.
me. Bueno, ¿alguna pregunta más? Si no, sí, tenemos aquí una pregunta.
Bună, îți mulțumesc pentru cuvintele tale. I think that will be better to do this in English. But thinking about that, you think and write out your country. How do you feel right now? Because you left it behind.
I left it, but I never left completely. I go very often to Moldova. My mother still lives there. Have lots of friends. I love my city. I love Chișinău. I love it more and more. Older I get, more I love the city. I went this autumn, and I made myself a day to just go and visit my old place where we live, my kindergarten, my school. I had a meeting with children from my school, and they all called me Signora, Doamna, which was, I must tell you, something, because of course when you enter school you imagine yourself with this short skirt, with running and with all the boys kicking you, but basically you're an old woman, for them very old already. And then my principal of the school, who is now, I don't know, very old, came to this meeting, and we all cried, and then the children laughed how we all crying. And I came from there, I understood one thing. I would never be separated from that place. I can live anywhere, but for me, that place is like a charge. It's a huge charge, and I go there, and everything which I lived just comes back to me and hugs me and overwhelms me. And I go back home, and I feel that there is one place in the world where I will never be alone. Even if I would be 300 years old and everyone who I know today will die, I will never be alone in that place. And I never thought I will say these words. If you would ask me 10 years ago, I would say, it's fine, keep in touch. But no, it's just like a huge magnet which draws me there. Yes.
Muy bien. Pues si no hay ninguna pregunta más, terminamos ya la sesión. Thank you very much, Tatiana, for your wonderful reflections and very inspiring. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.